The first time since US President Donald Trump escalated his tariff offensive. Prime Minister Modi noted that India and China both pursue strategic autonomy and their relations should not be seen through a third country lens. PM Modi also held a bilateral with Russian President Putin. We learned from sources that the formal meeting went on for around 50 minutes, where they discussed expediting an end to the Ukraine conflict and finding a durable peace settlement. In a rare occurrence, both Modi and Putin were also seen traveling together in the car for their bilateral discussions. This was their first meeting since the US imposed additional tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. The SCO joint statement condemned the Pahalgam terror attack but did not name Pakistan explicitly. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif also attended the summit. The joint declaration also strongly condemning the airstrikes on Iran by Israel and the US. Here is Prime Minister Modi and President Putin speaking at their bilateral meeting.
मैं हमेशा अनुभव करता हूं कि आपको मिलना मतलब एक यादगार मीटिंग भी होती है, बहुत सी चीजों की जानकारियों का आदान प्रदान करने का अवसर मिलता है। हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। दोनों पक्षों के बीच नियमित रूप से कई उच्च स्तरीय बैठकें भी हुई है। इस वर्ष दिसंबर में हमारी 23वीं समिट के लिए 140 करोड़ भारतीय उत्सुकतापूर्वक आपका इंतजार कर रहे हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, हमारी स्पेशल एंड प्रिविलेज स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की गहराई और व्यापकता का परिचायक है। कठिन से कठिन परिस्थितियों में भी भारत और रूस हमेशा कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चले हैं।
Усилия по созданию в Евразии архитектуры равной и неделимой безопасности.
यूरेशिया में समान और अविभाज्य सिक्योरिटी ढांचे को बनाने के लिए प्रयासों के लिए एक मंच प्रदान करता है।
To take this discussion forward, I'm now joined by former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal, Ashok Kanta, former Indian Ambassador to China, and Jonathan Cheng, China Bureau Chief at the Wall Street Journal. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us in the program today. Jonathan, if I can begin with you. This meeting took place under the leadership of Xi Jinping and China at a time when the world has been hit by US tariffs. And there is a doubt about US's position in the global economic order as well. What was Xi Jinping's message to SCO partners at this point?
Well, I think the message is pretty clear. As you point out, this is a time of turmoil in the global environment. Of course, Donald Trump's return to office has upended a lot of assumptions about the way the world works and about foreign relations, and Xi Jinping does see an opportunity here. Certainly, we've just heard you talk a little bit about the tariffs that the U.S. has imposed on India, and I think that came as a big shock. I don't know that this trip was planned after those tariffs. I think it must have come before, but nonetheless, you do see this reshaping of the global jigsaw puzzle here a little bit, and I think Xi Jinping, with the wind at his back right now, I think the economy in China is not as strong as it could be, but it's strong enough on AI and on military and all sorts of different, cutting-edge technologies. China is showing how central it is to the global economy with semiconductors and everything else. And I think it's a good time to signal to neighbors like India, like Russia, that there is another power that they can sort of cluster around here. And I think that's the message that is implicit there. Of course, Xi Jinping will not come out and say this explicitly, but I think you can see it in the imagery and in the body language and in the words that he uses as well, that this is part of the intent here.
Right. That's an important point. Let me take that to Ambassador Ashok Kanta. Ambassador Kanta, clearly Xi Jinping trying to send out the message that China is ready to fill the void that is being left by the United States. How do you see the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi that took place? It was almost a 1 hour long meeting. There was a discussion on the boundary dispute. There was a demand that there should be predictability and transparency in economic ties as well. But the question a lot of investors would be asking, will this meeting lead to a closer alignment, a more long-term alignment, or will there be cautious approach from both sides?
This meeting was a substantive engagement between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. Essentially, it has taken forward the process which commenced when Prime Minister met with President Xi in Kazan, Russia, October last year. What we're looking at is a calibrated improvement of relations between India and China. We are trying to frame this relationship more in bilateral context, though of course, turbulence in geopolitical environment, it does impact the relationship. Prime Minister was very clear that we are not looking at India-China relations through prism of relations with a third country or lens of a third country. I think that's the message he was conveying, that some speculation that India is moving towards China because it's under pressure from the United States. I think he wanted to allay such perceptions. Now, in terms of progress, yes, one can see greater momentum in economic contacts between India and China, apart from people-to-people engagement. But I think Indian side has made it very clear that there are issues that need to be addressed, including issues relating to border. Prime Minister reiterated that for normal development relations, you need peace and tranquility to maintain in border areas. Border issue is back to the center stage of the relationship, and there are a whole lot of other concerns which need to be addressed. So what I will say that, it remains a cautious expansion of relations, step-by-step improvement, rather than any kind of a reset in ties between India and China at this stage.
All right, not a reset, but a cautious expansion in economic relations. Ambassador Sybil, if I can come to you, when it came to the boundary question, the Prime Minister underlined the importance of peace and tranquility on the border for continued development of bilateral relations. The two leaders noted with satisfaction the successful disengagement last year and the maintenance of peace and tranquility along the border area since then. They expressed commitment to a fair, reasonable, mutually acceptable resolution of the boundary question, proceeding from the political perspective of the overall bilateral relations and the long-term interests of the two people. They recognize that the important decisions taken by the two special representatives earlier this month and agreed to work further towards those efforts. Now, Ambassador Sybil, does the boundary dispute still take center stage for India? Because this statement seems to indicate that whatever has been achieved via the disengagement, we're happy with that. But what about status quo ante? That was the demand of India ever since the Galwan clashes took place, that we revert to the positions that existed before April 2020.
I think that position remains. But there was no sense in putting this position straightforwardly in the exchanges that they had. This has already been conveyed at various levels in the past, and I'm sure that this was conveyed to Wang Yi. They know what India's position is. The point the Prime Minister was trying to make is that we've had this disengagement, and currently the situation is peaceful. But there has been no de-escalation and, of course, no question of any redeployment. On the contrary, China is building this railway now from Xinjiang to Tibet, which will give them greater possibilities of moving troops and material and whatever to the Tibet region to maintain pressure on India. I've always asked myself the question as to why China wants to militarize Tibet so much. There is no military threat from India. Our position is essentially defensive. But leave that aside. If you look at the joint statements that have been issued when we've had high-level visits from China to India and vice versa, they're always forward-looking. And on the border issue, there always is an agreement to maintain peace and tranquility. In fact, in the 2005 and 2006 visits of the Chinese Prime Minister and the Chinese President, it was agreed that the two sides will begin the process of actually clarifying the line of control, actual line of control, which was agreed to in the 1993-96 agreements. But it didn't move forward. As regards this formulation that the border issue should be resolved on the basis of the political, strategic perspective and everything else. This was the reason why the special representative mechanism was set up, not to go into long-winded discussions on legalities and history, but look at the political aspects and the strategic aspects, and then take a decision. Now we've come back to the same formulation after, I don't know, 24 meetings of the special representatives that didn't produce any result. Whether now they'll produce any result, it remains to be seen, especially as China is very rigid on the issues of territory. And the gap between India and China, economic, military, and other, has increased, which is why it's not very clear why China would make any major concessions to India on the border. From our point of view, if we can maintain peace and tranquility on the border, then we can slowly open up other aspects of our ties in a limited way, so as to keep the relationship stable and also persuade China. And this has always been our case without getting any result, that we must reduce the deficit, trade deficit between the two countries. We've always said it is unsustainable, but the deficit keeps expanding. Now, whether as a result of these soft noises that are being made and the fact that Trump is throwing his weight around, is targeting, he's also targeted China, though they are confused messages. If China is now willing actually also to look for alternative markets and everything else, because their market to the United States is bound to be affected, it has been affected. Actually, the exports, imports between the two countries have gone down pretty drastically this year. So whether that will make them
I'm going to come back to that.
To a more balanced trade with India opening up their market, it remains to be seen. In the past, they haven't done it.
That remains to be seen.
Now, one can't say. I would remain skeptical.
Yes, and
I would say
and
that
India has also been, Indian companies have also been dependent on Chinese imports all these years. That has also been a reality. But let me also bring in a question about what China was looking for its meeting with the Indian Prime Minister. And Jonathan, we saw how some powerful members of the Xi Jinping administration, including Kai Chi, the member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo of the Communist Party of China, also met with the Prime Minister. He was also supposed to have a banquet in the honor of the Prime Minister, but it could not happen due to scheduling issues. But they did have a bilateral meeting there as well. What did Xi Jinping come to the table with when it comes to an offer for closer economic relations, a closer handshake when it came to manufacturing, investments, and more long-term relations between India and China? What about reducing the trade deficit, buying more from India as well, as Ambassador Sybil was pointing out?
Well, I wish I was in the room with them. Unfortunately, I wasn't. But you know, the complaints that India has, of course, about the trade deficit with China are not unique to India. Basically, the same message, of course, has been coming most loudly from Washington. But so many countries have these sorts of complaints because China has spent so much of the last few decades becoming so dominant in manufacturing. And I don't see any real shift in the priorities in Beijing. I think the hope is still to maintain this edge. And it's not just at the very high end of the market when it comes to semiconductors, electric vehicles, solar panels, drones, and other sort of leading edge products. I think China intends to keep dominant in the entire stack across the whole spectrum of everything that is manufactured. And I think that is going to be a problem for China because it is going to alienate and cause problems with other countries. I think at this point, Xi Jinping thinks he has a pretty good hand, and there are many things that you can point to that support that claim. You know, I think when it comes to things like the border issue, we've already talked about it here, that China doesn't budge on that sort of issue. They're not going to give any ground there, literally or metaphorically. And I think also when it comes to trade, I think that's a possible area where perhaps there's a little bit of leeway. I think when there's enough pressure coming from enough countries, there may be some willingness to yield there. But I do think that effectively there is a message here from Xi to Modi to say, listen, we don't want you to get too close to the Americans. They're not trustworthy. Of course, under Biden and even under, I think, the first Trump administration, you saw a real effort to bring India into the fold under the Quad sort of banner there to encircle China in a certain sense with Japan, with Australia. And I think China wants to look for ways that they can loosen that right now. And I think India looks like the ripest target because Australia, I think, for the most part, remains in the US camp, and I think Japan as well. So I do think they sense opportunity with India.
All right, we're going to take a short break, but when we return, we're going to speak about Prime Minister's meeting with President Putin. And let's also not forget that on the red carpet earlier today, in the Leaders' Lounge before the photograph, you had President Xi, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin having a discussion. They shared some light moments as well. We'll discuss about that in detail once we return.